Welcome back to Making Plugins with Eric Valentine. I actually get to say welcome back, because this is the second episode related to making this plugin. And I'm sure you guessed that an episode like this was going to happen. I've done one of these shootout videos before, got a bit crazy on that one, but it was fun, and I think initiated a good conversation. We all learned a lot in that, and so we'll see how this one goes. At the outset, I'm always going to admit, I'm here representing Undertone Audio. I'm waving our flag, and I certainly will have a bias. It would be impossible for me to totally eliminate that for myself, but I really am trying to be objective and try and represent all of these as best as I can. Some of it is pretty straightforward. It's like a bunch of people have made emulations of Fairchild plugins, and all I have to do is, match the same preset on them and try and dial in the same, what sounds like the same amount of compression. Generally, the gain reduction meters, you can't really match those. The ballistics are so different that those, don't really, aren't a good guide for that. So I do my best to do that, and then we can all check it out, and I can give my opinions about it, and you all have your opinions about it, and can all, see what we think, see what we like, see what we don't like, So I'm going to do my best to try and be objective with all this stuff. Okay, and just a little bit about the test setup. So there are a few sort of baselines I had to establish here. So I'm not going to use any oversampling, even though the Undertone plugin does offer oversampling. Some of these don't, so it didn't seem fair to have oversampling on ours, and it's not available on others. So all the plugins will be left with no oversampling turned on. The other thing to be aware of is that, on the plugins that actually have the original 6 Fairchild presets, I am setting it to those same presets on all of them, but they are really quite different. In a second here, I'm going to pull up, just as an example, the UnFairchild plugin versus one of the other ones that has, the 6 original presets, and set them the same, and just they're crazy different, So in that case, we're really sort of comparing, different takes on how to represent that preset on a Fairchild. And realistically, when you look at how different they are, there's no chance that they're going to sound the same or similar or whatever. We're really comparing what different people thought was a good representation of that preset on a Fairchild. And in our case, we're really going after having a plugin recreate a recreation of a Fairchild, and the UnFairchild does not sound exactly like an original Fairchild. There's things in there that, along the way, choices that I made that are intentionally different. And so some of that might reveal itself in the differences between these presets. But, we'll just hear what those differences are. But it's unrealistic to think that these presets are really supposed to sound the same, because they're different. Some of them, are being, modeled after an original Fairchild, a particular one that may have been set up a particular way, and it may respond very differently. So we'll see that in a second. I'm going to start there with one little plugin doctor comparison. I'm not going to do all of them in plugin doctor, because some of them didn't have VST, and wouldn't all, whatever. We'll do one of those. This would take too long anyway. So for all of these, I'm going to do my best to match up levels. We all know how important that is. I got reprimanded for not being careful about that in one of my little promo videos there. Totally fair. I posted my explanation for that, but and then posted one where I did match them up properly. So it would be more useful for people that are actually really trying to hear the difference between the two things. So for this is not as much for entertaining people with a promo video. This is really for hearing the subtle differences between these plugins, or in some cases not so subtle differences. But so matching up the levels is important, and so I'm trying to do it with LUFs. I have a LUF meter on all the tracks, and I'm just matching up the long LUF accumulated level, and that seems to work pretty good. Once the numbers match up, just audibly listening to them, they really, really sound very close to me. So that's going to be sort of the standard for matching levels in all of this stuff. And so with all that, I think we're ready to dive in. Let's take a look at how these things, at least 2 of them show up in Plugin Doctor. Okay, so right out of the gate, we're showing the frequency response of these two plugins, and I mean they're crazy different. And I think this KIT Blackbird plugin is definitely more accurate to what an original Fairchild frequency response curve is. And so, I did a lot of measurements on those when we were originally developing the UnFairchild, and it's a product of the transformers they used and all of that stuff. And so there was a point along the way with the hardware UnFairchild where I made a choice about the transformers that we were going to use that did have a little more extension in the low end than an original Fairchild. It was something that I didn't want to chase exactly because there was no benefit in it for me. And so in that particular case, I wanted to maintain as much weight down there as I could, and that it's an audible difference that you'll hear between an UnFairchild and an original real Fairchild 670. And so for the people that want to have this thing happen when they strap it across their mix bus, there's boxes out there that do that were more true to replicating that, but it just wasn't useful for me. So I chose not to chase that. And then, so in the plugin will reflect that. So there is a roll-off in the low end in the plugin that, reflects what the hardware does. And then the UnFairchild also stays flatter across the frequency spectrum. And there is like, a high mid-range boost that happened in original Fairchilds that I also didn't put a huge amount of effort into chasing. So, but this one also has a very aggressive roll-off in the high end. I don't remember it being that aggressive, being down whatever this is. I mean, 6 dB at 20K. Maybe the particular one that they were testing with was like that. The ones that I looked at weren't like that, but they vary. They're old boxes and they have all kinds of varying degrees of aging components or whatever. And they can all be a little bit different. And this was one that they were particularly fond of, that they loved. This was the the label that was on it, and so they wanted to replicate that. So, so there's that, and that you can see the little sort of mid-range boost in there. I've definitely seen that in original Fairchilds, and that was also another thing. Like with the UnFairchild, the hardware and the plugin both, like I don't really want it to do that part of it. I would rather. I'm using this thing as a compressor, and it was always something that was kind of challenging for me. If I was using an original Fairchild, if I put that thing across my bus, I would instantly, like, you'd have to have it on there the whole time, and EQ and mix with that thing on there, and that is not my usual workflow. And so I would get the mix sounding as good as I could and try and get there without compression, and then towards later in the process would add some mix bus compression. And if it's putting this EQ curve on there, then I got to go back and redo a bunch of stuff. And so really what I want from this thing is the harmonic color and the sensation of the compression and the benefits of what the compressor will do. I don't really want it to totally change the frequency response. So it's a choice I made. Some people may agree with it, some people may not, but it makes life easier for me when I'm using it and working on stuff. So that's what you get. So there's that. A big difference there. Okay, so then we can look at the harmonics. So let's see, just for a second we'll do it. So here's the UnFairchild harmonic distortion signature here. So you can see, there's a second order, third order, and then some higher stuff. It looks like, I'm not sure what this is, but maybe there's a noise floor that they incorporated in this. I haven't actually listened for that. I probably should see if this thing is adding noise the way, an analog tube circuit would. I'm guessing that's what this is. But it looks like the harmonic distortion stuff is quite similar. There's slightly less with the KIT Blackbird one. So we have slightly more harmonic distortion, and we have more of the upper harmonics that are present. When you're at a unity gain setting, these probably are not audible. You know, they're way, way down there. But as you start to push it more and add more compression, these upper harmonics became very, very important when we were trying to get it right on our plugin. So then, let's see. Let's look at some dynamics here. So at the basic setting, so the DC threshold obviously will affect the knee in the compression, but and this is sort of the softest setting here, and you can see that, you know, the knee is definitely softer on the UnFairchild with its lowest DC threshold setting. The KIT Blackbird 1 is got a harder knee and then is much more of like a limiter once it gets there. So a little bit different there. And then if we look at the attack and release, this is where some huge differences start to reveal themselves. So if we look at we'll zoom in on the attack for a second here. And so the KIT Blackbird is definitely, you know, using a much more conventional logarithmic type attack curve here. And so the UnFairchild has a more peculiar shape to it. There's a little bit of this overshoot and then a little bump and then this slow rise. And this little bit of overshoot was important ultimately. And for me, it creates a sensation of things sounding compressed even when there's not a huge amount of compression going on. And so you can get the sensation of that compression pumping without having a massive amount of actual gain reduction happening. And it does some really cool stuff with drums and mix bus and stuff like that. So that was something that we ended up with on this that just felt right. It felt like the real thing. So then if we look at, and then here's the KIT one again, much more sort of straightforward there. So then look at the release. And I talked about this a little bit in the last video, but okay, so you can see here the Blackbird release looks much more linear and is quite long. This looks like it's probably about almost 1.1 seconds. I seem to remember, you know, in the manual that what the original Fairchild is supposed to be for preset 2, time constant 2 is 0.8 seconds. So maybe a tiny bit long there. But the UnFairchild is doing some very weird stuff. It's a lot shorter than that. And there was a reason for that when you start getting into lots of compression. What I noticed is that the way the thing actually sounded once you really started compressing, like there's the theoretical math that you can calculate based on the performance of the VMU tubes and the resistor capacitor networks that are establishing the time constants. And so you can write down what that number is. And then you can actually experience what the thing does. And at least with the UnFairchild, it was definitely, it just, as you compressed more and more and more, it just felt like the release time was getting shorter and shorter. And so we replicated that. And so this is a healthy amount of compression. You can see it's going up to probably 15 dB of compression. And, you know, so the release time will reflect that. And there's also this sort of overshoot again in the release time, and you can see this knee in here. That was part of this. If you watched the long form video about making this plugin, I showed what the actual response was of the hardware on Fairchild. It had this weird bump, this initial sort of rush of sound, and that's what creates that sort of density in the sound of the compression on the UnFairchild. And I was just really chasing what the hardware did, you know. So obviously, you know, this curve, maybe it's closer to an original Fairchild, maybe, probably, I'm not totally sure about that. But there's no question that these are going to sound very, very different. So we have to just sort of keep that in mind that, you know, people have different takes on how time constant 2 goes on a Fairchild plugin. All right, so there you go. That's all that stuff. So I thought it'd be cool, I have these videos, there's a long form video and these promotional videos where I'm demonstrating the sound of the UnFairchild on some particular source material. There's a particular drum recording, this one mic drum recording I did a long time ago, and then a particular instrumental mix of a song that I worked on back in 2007, and then a vocal. And so this is a cool opportunity to hear all of these other Fairchild plugins on that same stuff, and hear how they all stack up on that stuff. So we'll start with the drum loop. Let's just hear what the drum loop is. So that's what the drum loop sounds like without anything on it. Here we go. We'll turn on the UnFairchild. There's a healthy amount of compression on there. That's without it. There it is with it. Time constant 2. It's always been a good choice, for drums and stuff. This is the lowest DC threshold. And just the threshold turned all the way up. Pretty straightforward. All right, let's start hearing some other stuff. So the first one we're going to compare with is good old Puigchild. This one's been around for a long time. I've definitely used it on some stuff. When it first came out, I was pretty excited about it. And it definitely had some uses for me. It's definitely been on some mixes, final mixes that went out into the world. So here we go. Here comes the Puigchild. So pretty cool, This I was surprised that this one still stands up pretty good. It does a good job of getting kind of thick in there and bringing out a lot of that room energy. And the main difference, and probably the issue that I've always had with this plugin, is how it impacts. And so there are always times when, if I tried to use it on drums or something, I'd always have to parallel it with another compressor that would accentuate those transients a little bit more, because this was always a little soft in how it impacted. And it's still kind of the biggest difference that I hear between these. And you also hear the additional weight of the UnFairchild, that extended low end. It's just preserving more of the low end in there. We can hear it one more time. Here's the UnFairchild. But pretty darn cool. All right, so the next one is the UAD Fairchild. This is not the legacy one, but their most recent version of this. And I chose to use the 660 version because people may not know this, but I was always more of a fan of the sound of the 660. And the person who originally started this UnFairchild thing was this guy named Garen Avetisian. The UnFairchild is really more a dual channel 660. And so it started as a replication of the 660 circuit more so than the 670 circuit. So I don't know, people may not have known that, but that's really what that thing was based on. So here is the UAD 660 Fairchild plugin. And so we can switch between these now. Pretty much set the same. I turned the threshold all the way up and set the gain so it sounded like it should be about the same amount of compression. And, time constant 2. So we'll start with the UnFairchild, go to the UAD, go back to the UnFairchild, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so these have been around for a little while. I've tried to use these a bunch over the years. I've not had a lot of luck using these UAD Fairchild plugins. In fact, I don't know if I've ever really got them to do something that I wanted to use. They're a great company. They make great stuff. They have tons of plugins that I love and use all the time. This just didn't happen to be one of them. And this thing just never felt like a Fairchild to me. One of its symptoms is one of my least favorite things about plug-in compressors, where more than anything, I hear it pulling the sound away from me, and that's not what I want from a compressor. I often want the compressor to pull things towards me, and I really hear that on this plugin, and it's always drove me crazy. And so, you know, put it all across your mix bus, and it sounds to me like it's just pulling your mix away. So that's just been my experience with it. But check it out. This time we'll start with the UAD one, and then I'll switch to the UnFairchild one. So it's a pretty obvious difference there. You can really hear the UAD one kind of pulling the drums away from you, and when you switch to the UnFairchild, it just kind of stays more in your face. It's different personality there. Okay, next on the list here is Midnight. Okay, this one is a little trickier because it doesn't have the presets, so I can't just go time constant 2. Here, let's see how they compare. But I did my best to try and match these up, and so, you know, the release is set pretty fast to kind of get closer to what the UnFairchild does, which is a little bit faster in the release time. And so let's compare these. Yeah, a lot of things to mess with on here. I did my best to really try and get the most out of this thing and get it to sound as cool as possible. And it's a cool sounding plugin. So here we go. Okay, so pretty darn close, man. You know, when I really tried to dial this thing to sound like this, which is, I don't know, it's kind of weird, but I guess that's what we're doing. And obviously, I'm using the Eclipse setting, which really appears to be them trying to copy the UnFairchild, because it says 670M Mark II, which is what ours is. And that's the model number of the original hardware. So. So that's, they must have got their hands on an UnFairchild and created this, you know, emulation based on what they measured on an UnFairchild, which is cool. I'm happy to be included in that. And so messing around with the knobs, it was pretty close. And also, when I've done some investigation about the frequency response curve, I was curious about it because the high-end character is cool on this. It's interesting. That it also has an extended low end, very similar to this. So they replicated that part of it. So cool low end. You know, you get more of the sub frequencies in there. And I'll say straight away, the thing that I like about this, and the thing that I think Acustica really stands out for, is their ability to capture the harmonic distortion characteristics. And the high end on this Midnight plugin is pretty effing great. It's really impressive. It has a cool quality up in the high frequencies. And then the only other thing that I hear between them that I was never quite able to get this to do, I messed with this shape mod or SH mod, whatever that's supposed to be, a whole bunch to see if I could, you know, and found a sweet spot there. But still, the difference for me is the UnFairchild impacts in a way. The way it grabs to me is just more satisfying sounding. And this one, I think, probably doesn't have that little bit of overshoot in the attack curve and stuff that's really, you know, characteristic of this plugin. And so, consequently, it always feels like this thing is just, it hits harder. It just has this sensation of a more aggressive sound to it because of that. But here, we'll check it out one more time. So we'll start with Midnight. Yeah, and that impact, the thing that's important about it, and something I chased quite a bit with this plugin, went around and around with it, is not only like having this sort of aggressive impact, but like where in the frequency range do you really feel that impact? And that was something that's really important to me with this. And it's one of the other symptoms of plug-in compressors that's been really challenging for me, is that they will frequently sound kind of pinched, and the attack of things get very sort of thin and pinched sounding. And I really want it to impact more in sort of like the lower fundamentals of whatever that burst of sound is, whether it's a snare drum, a kick drum, or a bass guitar, or whatever it is that you're compressing. I want to feel the punch in the low end of it, and I feel that a little bit more here than I do here. But this thing is definitely cool. They've got a cool approach over there. Okay, next we've got Slate. Good old Slate. This one's been around for a while. I've used it, a bunch over the years. I can't remember what it is now, but there was one mix that I did where this thing was on the drum mix or the mix bus or something, and when I got deeper into the mix, I was like, okay, I'm gonna put a real hardware compressor on. I'll replace this thing. It'll be way better once I replace it. And I tried to do that, and it didn't work. Like everything had really been dialed for this plugin, and I could never beat it after that. So it stayed on there, stayed on the final mix. So I've definitely used this thing before. So here we go. Let's compare this one. So this is, we'll start here. We'll go there. Okay, so I do like the way this one impacts the attack of it. Is pretty satisfying. I didn't have a chance to show it, and I did some other ways of measuring it, and I've always known this about this plugin, but this thing went after that original Fairchild curve pretty aggressively, and so there is a substantial push in that sort of like 2K high mid-range area, and then a pretty significant roll-off in the low end. And so that has been my one challenge with using this plugin. Like, it's that thing. If you're going to use it, you got to put it on early because it dramatically affects the frequency response. When you put it on there, it's like if your mix is already as bright as you want it and you put this thing on there, you're going to have to re-EQ some stuff. It's just, very aggressive in that way. And so you'll hear that difference. And that was one of the things when I was doing all this LUFS stuff, that this one, even when the LUFS matched, always sounded a little bit louder because it's more present in the frequency ranges that our ears are really sensitive to. But I did it by the numbers, so this one always, whenever this one comes up, you'll notice it just sounds a little bit louder. But here, we'll do it one more time. We'll start with Slate, and then switch to this one. Yeah, so it's cool, man. I like, they got the sort of, the character of the attack I thought is pretty great on this. For me, my preference would be to have this thing be more flat. In the modern world, I'd like to be able to put on a compressor and only mostly just be adding compression and not be totally re-EQing things. So just my take on it, but still good stuff to be had from that one. And so there's a pretty obvious difference in the frequency response when you switch between there. So yeah, that's sort of overwhelming what you're hearing when you compare these two. This thing just has way more low end, and it doesn't have that push in the high mids going on. Okay, so now we got, let's get into this thing. This is one of the more recent contributions to the vast landscape of Fairchild plugins. And I'll just say right now, I apologize if I didn't happen to grab one of the ones that is your favorite that you would have loved me to compare with. There's so many out there. There's just a ton, and I went after the ones that were interesting to me, or I already had, or were easy to get, or whatever. And so there they are. But yeah, there's so many out there to go after. But so here's this one. This one came out just maybe a couple months before ours did, and we just saw the plug-in doctor differences there. So, as you will guess, this thing sounds quite different. Okay, let's check it out. Okay, so you can really hear this thing just gets a lot more mid-rangey. Quite a bit of low end getting rolled off, quite a bit of high end getting rolled off. And I don't love the character of the compression on this one. You can hear it getting yanked around. Like as the drum beat is playing along, you hear it going doot, 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 like the level getting changed. And, you know, when I put a compressor on something, I do it so that thing will go whoosh and stay there. I want it, it's like, stay drums, stay. It's like what I tell my dog Max, stay. And this thing almost does the opposite of that. It's, and there are compressors that do that. And so it may be partially because of this thing really transitions into limiting at a certain point, and so it really yanks on stuff, you know, that are going above a certain point. Yeah, I'm not sure what's really the cause of that, but this thing has that symptom pretty bad. Here, we'll start with this one. We'll switch to the UnFairchild. So there you go. Yeah, big differences, much longer release time. It's kind of jerking the sound around a little bit. Sounds a bit narrower. Okay, so let's get into our next thing. So we will compare mix bus. Here we go. By the way, you can just see, here's my little LUF meter. I'll just go down the line and you can see them all hopefully still showing up at 25 minus 0.6. Okay, this one was a little bit higher. So Midnight was a little higher by 1/10 of a dB. 25.6 and then 25. Yeah, so they stayed very consistent. That's what we were trying to do. It seems to be working. Okay, so here we go. So this is, you may have seen the little promo video where I did me putting this on this instrumental mix of the song Gives You Hell by the All American Rejects. And so first, let's just hear it without any compression on there. So I'm going to bypass the UnFairchild. Let's just hear this thing. And, you know, this mix was really designed to have a lot of compression on it. It kind of doesn't work without a compressor. You know, it's just like the low end is just leaping out so much, you know, that it doesn't really make sense. And I got to show this two ways. So we'll do the time constant 2 version. Because, and I'll compare that to the other plugins that have time constant 2. So we can just hear the difference between the choices that were made for time constant 2. I would not use time constant 2 as a compression setting for this mix. And so then we'll go back, I'll switch to variable 2 with a setting that is really what I would do for this mix, and we'll compare that to the 2 plugins that don't have time constant presets. I thought that would be sort of make the most sense. Okay, so we'll start off with UnFairchild versus the Puigchild. So time constant 2, try to match up the amount of compression, match the levels. Here we go. Okay, so straight away, you hear the difference in the frequency response. There's definitely more, you know, sub-frequencies going on with this. This one just sounds a little bit, it just has a little less weight under it. And this one, even though, like, I set the compression, so it's definitely metering higher for sure. And it's part of, I think, a similar issue that I've had, like when it's on drums. When it's on the mix, it will be compressing and definitely managing the level, but it doesn't give me the sensation of compression. Like, I don't feel the pumping on this thing. And the mix ends up still sounding somewhat uncompressed somehow, even though it is actually really compressing stuff. So that was sort of my experience with it. We'll A-B it one more time. So I don't know. That's what it feels like for me. But you know, this thing has been good. I have used it on stuff. It's found its uses in my world over the years. I have to say I haven't used it a lot recently. And I think plugins sort of all kind of suffer that same fate. You know, like you first get it, it's like, oh man, this is going to change my whole world. This is so amazing. I love it. I'm putting it on everything. It's the best thing ever. And then you use it for a long time, and you kind of get used to it and used to what it does, and you want something new, you know, and then the plugins sort of fall out of favor, and you just forget about them, move on, never use it again, you know. But you know, it's a good plugin. It was actually fun for me to hear this again, and you know, and hear that it's better than I expected it to be. I'll say that much. You know, for how much I've forgotten about it over the years, I think it's still actually a relevant plugin. Okay, so here we go. Let's move on to the next one. So now we got the UAD, and so in this case I used the 670. That's, I think, you know, the version of this that's really intended to be put across a mix bus. So we'll start off with the UnFairchild. They're both on time constant 2, all that stuff. I try to match up the amount of compression, and here we go. Okay, so there it is, and it's, you know, it has a pretty good impact to it. It's still that same sensation that I experienced with the drums with these, is that I feel it sort of pulling the mix away from me a little bit, and that's, you know, probably mostly due to the character of the release shape, you know, this probably does that, but not too bad there. Here, we'll start with this one this time, and then switch to the UnFairchild. Yeah, at least in the headphones, it does sound like this one's a little bit louder for some reason now. Let's see. So this one was 21.5 was the benchmark. Yeah, they're matching up in LUFS, but yeah, sometimes maybe the extra low end, if you're not really feeling that in the room, if your speakers are not like really giving you stuff that's down at 30 and 40 hertz, the UnFairchild one may end up sounding a little bit quieter. I'll tell you, the one thing that they really got right on this plugin that was actually kind of tricky to do was the ballistics of the meter. Just look at these meter movements. This is what an actual VU really looks like. That's really what it's supposed to look like. And we did our best to try. I chased this for a long time. We tried all kinds of stuff. The one thing that we did get that was really important to me, you know, like the gain reduction meter on the hardware UnFairchild, it's like a reference as to, like, in general how much compression, but when it actually is sitting at -5, it doesn't mean that the output level has been turned down exactly 5 dB. That's just not possible to do. The way that circuit is designed, it's just not that accurate. There's no way to do that unless you change things radically. But on the plugin, I felt like there's no reason for me to duplicate in inaccuracy in the hardware. So these meters really do accurately reflect what is changing on the output of the device. So when this thing says -3, if you check the change in level on the output, it will be exactly -3 dB. So they, you know, I thought, let's just actually do it so it tells you something that you can rely on that's meaningful. So, but yeah, you know, maybe at some point we'll figure out how to get the meter to just move smoother or something. I would love that, but you know, there was a point where it's like, it's just a meter. How much time do we really want to spend on this, you know? Okay, so here we go. We'll compare to the last one that actually has the time constant 2 preset, and then after that I'm going to change the setting on here. We'll compare to the other two. Okay, so this time I'm using the 67. I'm assuming that this is what they would recommend putting across a mix bus if you're going to do that. Time constant 2, matched up the amount of compression, try to get the levels the same, all that stuff. Here we go. Let's check this out. Okay, yeah. I have a similar reaction to this one, this Stereo 670 version, as the 660 on the drums. It still is doing that thing where I just feel like it's sort of pulling the mix away from me more than like bringing stuff forward in the mix. And so I don't know. I'm sure there's an application for this thing out there somewhere, and people will enjoy it. But for what I am reaching for a compressor for, this is doing a different thing. So we'll check it out one last time, and you all can see what you think. But we'll start with the Blackbird one this time, and I'll switch to the UnFairchild. Yeah, I don't know. This just sounds so much smoother to me and just stays in focus. There's so much more weight under it. It's a very different experience listening to these two. All right, so now I'm going to change the preset on here. So this was the settings that I came up for time constant 2. So now I want to pull up what I would actually do for this mix. And so this is using one of the variable modes where I can slow down the attack time, sort of a medium release time. I brought up the DC threshold a little bit just to change the knee a little bit. And so we can hear this now. This is really a setting I would use for this mix with this plugin. So check this out. There it is without it again. So a lot more impact, really punchy, which is really what this mix was designed for, is to have a compressor that creates those impacts, And so now we can compare, let's do Midnight. Since this doesn't have the time constant presets, I came up with something that I thought would be close to this. And we can check out what we got here. So we'll start with the UnFairchild, go to this, then go back. Here we go. So similar to the drum stuff, really nice high-end quality on this thing. And when I checked it, it really is flat up there. And so whatever they're doing with the harmonic distortion components to color the high end is really quite wonderful in this plugin. It's pretty cool. And then similar to the drums, I love the impact of the UnFairchild. And this one just feels a little softer. It's just a little more polite in the way it attacks when the compression engages. So we'll listen to it one more time. Pretty darn cool, yeah. Pretty close there, pretty cool. They each have qualities that are pretty nice. So it's an instance where this might be good, on one thing, and this might be better on a different thing. But I think these are both useful tools. Okay, so now the last one for Mix by Stuff. We'll check out good old Slate here. We'll start here, go there, then go back. So you hear the obvious difference in the frequency response curve. I mean, it like re-voices the mix. There's just so much more high mid presence in there, and you really feel the absence of some of that subby stuff. But I do enjoy the character of how this thing grabs. I think they got that part pretty cool. We'll hear it one more time. Here we go. Pretty cool. All right, on to vocals. Here we go. So this was the vocal example that I used, or I have up on the website. Okay, so a little bit about this vocal. So I talked about this before. This is a vocal recording that's coming directly from the mic preamp. I get the benefit of having access to that. The way that I'm recording now, everything gets captured both as unprocessed mic preamp outputs and an analog version where there's processing and go through the tape machine and stuff like that. But I get to go back and I can grab at this stuff and play with processing it differently. And so that is beneficial for something like this. Okay, so this vocal, you know, I did the things that I would typically do to Grace's vocal. So there's a high pass on there because it comes off the mic preamp completely un-EQ'd. It's a little Beyer 160 that she was singing into. Even with that mic, this is nice to do. It just places the vocal so it just sits above the music. You know, it doesn't interfere with any of the instruments that are sort of in the low mid-range. And there's not a whole lot of the notes that she's singing are really start appearing in this range here. There's really no pitches that are being sung down there. So you're really not losing anything down there. So let's hear this vocal.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama.
So that's an uncompressed vocal, you know, it gets way louder here. There's passages that are, you know, probably 40 dB quieter than this stuff here. So then here it is with the high pass.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama. Yeah.
Okay, so there it is. You know, it just tightens it up a little bit, keeps it up more in this mid-range register, focuses it more there. Okay, so this is another thing that I almost always inevitably do on Grace's vocal. Ever since Soothe came into existence, I started doing this, and boy, do I love it. So it's just managing mid-range resonances. And so she has a thing when she really starts blasting, she uses this resonance in her voice in order to get that volume and power, and you'll get these huge spikes in the mid-range. And this thing does an amazing job of balancing that stuff out. And so I really wanted to do this example in a way that represents how this vocal should really sound and how I would actually really do this, instead of just slapping a compressor on here and asking it to do something that I don't think is particularly realistic. And it would be distracting for me if this wasn't going on, trying to listen to this thing without managing that part of it. So now we'll hear it with this on there. We've just heard it without. So this is, you'll see what it's doing in there.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go down the mother road. I always.
It's doing some heavy lifting right in there on those high notes, you know, and it's really amazing what this plugin does. I love it. And so these identical things are on all of the tracks. So all the tracks. So what ultimately the compressor plugin sees will be the identical information. But I just want to make sure everybody's aware that these things are on there as a part of this. And I think it's just helpful to hear this in the context that it's really meant to be done in. Okay, so then we'll turn on the music. It's important to hear it, how it relates to the music. So we can hear it one time. This is kind of fun to do. We'll hear it one time without any of this on there. It's too quiet. Then it gets crazy loud, you know. That's why we need a compressor. So, okay, so we'll turn this stuff back on. And now, let's put the UnFairchild on there. So we'll hear what that sounds like.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama.
That is some good vocal compression. And it was kind of ironic because most of the work that was done dialing in this compression was on that original drum loop. And it was a little later in the process where I was like, okay, I've heard this enough on drums. I should probably hear this on vocals as well. And started, listening to this vocal performance and was pleasantly surprised, like, wow, this works really good on vocals too. That's good news, So let's do our first A-B here. So let's see, we'll turn all of these on. We'll start with the Puigchild here. Here we go. So starting here, then we'll go there. This is such a long passage. I don't know that we'll go back to this. It's just going to take forever. So we'll just hear this one, then that one.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama. Only I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama.
So Puigchild did a pretty good job of just, evening out the level. There's maybe a couple places where it was a little bumpier, but the big difference that I hear is really in the harmonic color. And for me, the UnFairchild really maintains, some weight in the vocal. Like it stays kind of thick and full sounding, whereas this starts to get a little thin when she's going for those high notes and stuff. But, not bad. Not bad in there. Okay, so now we'll go on to the next one. Here we go. We'll go back to the 660 version here and check out the UAD one. All right. So here's the UnFairchild.
I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama. Only I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama.
Okay, but pretty good. Kind of a similar thing. Just feels a little thinner. I can hear it pulling the level around a little bit in there. But, not bad, not bad. All of this stuff, by the way, is time constant 1. That's been a go-to setting for me for vocals. It's just great on vocals. Use that a lot. Okay, let's check out Midnight. Here we go. And we'll start back here, and we'll switch to that.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama. Only I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama.
Okay, yeah. I think, it's going to be sort of kind of the same thing across all of these, that I just feel like this thing preserves the mid-range, just like a balance in the mid-range that I find much more musical than a lot of these other ones. This has that high-end thing going on, but in this particular case, I don't know that it's super beneficial. But pretty darn cool. Here we go, moving on. Okay, this one, I think we all can predict where this is going to go. This has a big push right in the range where it's probably not going to be super flattering in this case, but let's check it out. So starting with the UnFairchild.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama. Only I know just how far I'm gonna go. Down the mother road. I
not super flattering for this particular thing. Maybe if there's a vocal that really needed, some additional presence in it, this would do some of that work for you. But yeah, not what's needed there. And okay, so let's do one more thing here. This is our last doodad. Okay, back to the Blackbird again. Okay, so we'll start here, go to the Blackbird.
Only I know just how far I'm gonna go, down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama. Only I know just how far I'm gonna go, down the mother road. I always come back to you, mama.
Yeah, so I think at least this time constant 1, makes a little more sense to me. I don't hear it like yanking the volume. I think really the intention with this particular version of this plugin was probably for vocals. This is probably the best it's done in all of this comparing of stuff. It again feels a little thin to me. When it gets into those high notes, it feels just a little grainy and a little harsh up there. But it did a better job of kind of holding things in place a little better. And so there it is. I would say in the vocals, for me, listening to that stuff, what this UnFairchild plugin does on vocals, and again, it was a little bit of a surprise to me because that's not specifically how I started the process, is just in a different league than all of the other stuff. It just doesn't do what this does. It pulls the vocal forward, it holds it in place, it preserves a musicality in the mid-range that can be really difficult to chase on vocals. Very, very difficult to get. And, most all of these other ones, as soon as you put it on there, I feel myself leaping for an EQ to try and rectify whatever's going on with what those compressors are doing. So that's as strong as I'm going to get with that stuff. About how I feel with the differences of these things. Generally, I'm like, they're all good in their own way, but this one I really feel like it's just better. So there you go. Take that for whatever you will. So there it is. I'm sure there's probably things in there, especially with like the Midnight plugin. There's a lot of things to tweak and adjust in there. I did spend a good amount of time. I was hoping to film this video the previous day, but I spent so much time trying to learn these other plugins. I spent 4 or 5 hours just tweaking and adjusting and really trying to get it right. So I did spend some good time there. But I'm sure you will let me know that I probably missed an opportunity to really get the most out of some of these other plugins. I'm happy to hear about that, learn how to use these other plugins better. But maybe there's something useful in there if you're trying to figure out how these all stack up. Not even just the UnFairchild, but these other 5 plugins against each other. It's always interesting for me to hear this stuff, how different people are approaching things, and and we all get to learn something, hopefully, and hopefully I did that in a way that's useful for people. So thanks for checking it out. I'm sure there's going to be more to come. I'm very, very eager to hear your reactions to that, and let me know what you all think. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.